It is 4 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Our first item is our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Vice Chair, could you read our mission statement?
The mission of the Marshall Public School District is to educate, support, and prepare all learners for success.
Thank you. Approval of the agenda. I make a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any additions? Hearing none, please vote.
Thank you.
It is approved. Moving on to our presentations, Return to Learn 2020.
Figure this out with the distance learning and the social distancing and everything. All right. We have been working on, throughout the summer, a plan for Return to Learn. And I just want to start with a thanks to the admin team and the task force that's really put a lot of time into this plan and thinking through how can we make these 3 different models work. So we want to walk through kind of what we put together and share with you guys. First slide to share some commitments that we talked about as we started. Really our outlook, and I won't read every slide or every word on the pages to kind of cover what's on there, but we want to follow the guidelines that we're given. We've got guidelines from the Department of Ed, guidelines from Department of Health, from Centers for Disease Control, and then working with public health. And that's part of what we got last week from the state is really that regional task force working directly with public health, and Service Co-op has liaison and getting that information back from Department of Education and Department of Health to put a plan together that works and what's safest for kids. So that's really looking at those equity and safety pieces that we've laid out. And flexibility is one of our boxes there, thinking there are a lot of things we have to be flexible, just rethink how we do a lot of things that we've done to meet these different expectations. And I do feel like we have a solid framework together to share with you this evening. The big piece in this one too I wanted to share is every district is so much different. We're going to hear what all of our neighboring districts are doing and districts in other states, and we're looking at those guidelines we have and thinking what is best for Marshall. So what we're presenting tonight is what we feel is best for our students and our staff to safely bring them back into school. Our goal, certainly we started this summer with MDE sharing that we needed to come up with 3 different plans, 3 different ways to provide instruction this fall. And now we have a little guidance as to how we can move into each one. But looking at face-to-face, the in-person learning like we're familiar with, a hybrid model, that's what we put a lot of time into. We're going to spend most time walking through tonight. That's the one that's different, and right now that's the one that our numbers would say we would open on. So we're working on the hybrid plan as our model, knowing that we're going to continually review those numbers and see what those do, and we'll talk more about that later on in the presentation. And then distance learning is where we ended last spring. Distance learning would be the most restrictive option that is out there when the numbers show that we need to look at that as well. And considerations that we're sharing with you this evening as well, and I do want to share as I look at this one so I don't forget, on the meeting this afternoon too, we have Ann Oren from Public Health. She's our liaison there, and we may call on her to share a few things too. But one of the pieces as we talked to her today and throughout the, since last spring, we've been meeting with them on a regular basis, but considerations is that we know that the policies and procedures we put in won't necessarily eliminate, but they're intended to mitigate the risk of COVID-19 spread within our schools, and following those guidelines from those different entities I mentioned earlier. We looked at a lot of data, did a lot of research on this plan as well, looking at this was a piece that really stood out to us, looking at the Academy of Pediatrics, advocating that students have been away from that normal routine and some of those structures in place that we talk about, all those services we provide to meet the needs of kids, and how important it is to get them back face to face. So certainly that was a piece that we considered as we worked on our plan. Another big piece that we looked at is some data where we did some surveys within our staff and with our families. The first couple slides here talk about some of the teacher survey data, and there were a lot of pieces, a lot of feedback that we took as we used building in the plan. This was a big one, though. We looked at the three different models, the hybrid, the face-to-face, and distance learning. With each one, we said, do you support or do you oppose these different models? So it wasn't necessarily I choose distance over face-to-face. It was within the hybrid. We threw some options out and said, do you support this or not? And you'll see the data shows that really the hybrid and the face-to-face showed a stronger level of support within our teachers groups than what the distance learning did. They really were saying, we recognize the need to be back in person, back with some sort of in-person learning for our kids. The survey data from the teachers also, they identified some things that they need to make that happen, some curriculum working time. So we're working on workshop week, including some time specific to look at those pacing guides and curriculum guides and how to meet those needs for our students. Ensuring that all students and technology and staff have the technology they need, not talking just devices, but within the curriculum programs and within the internet access and all those other pieces tied to technology to make it work for this fall. And then they asked for district-wide policies related to accountability, assessment, and grading, where some common themes. Just said, we have kids that struggled with this, and how do we make sure we pull this together and make it work for everyone? So that played a big role in our planning. We asked families some of the same questions, and you look at the questions there about the level of support. It was asked in the same way, level of support in different models. Certainly a lot of support for face-to-face and hybrid. Distance learning had some, but it was not as much support as the face-to-face and hybrid plans. A big piece that we've talked about a lot. We don't have answers for everything yet tonight, but we got a framework started. Transportation is a very important piece. We have to get the students to school, and with the hybrid plans, the models ask for additional spacing on the buses and social distancing on the buses. Well, our buses are packed, as you already know, and how do we make that happen? So one of the things we'll talk about this evening, and we asked in our survey, was, to our families, we want to get the kids here. Can you help us make that happen? So we asked about, are you able to transport your students? And we had 63% of our families said, yeah, we can do that. We can get them to and from school all the time. The oranges, most of the time, that was 16%. Some of the time was 11%, and then the yellow and the lighter blue were a total of 10%. No, we can't transport. We're not sure. So that's something we'll ask in the presentation tonight. Is as we're putting this together, we're going to reach out to families again and say we really need that help to make this happen. We know some families need the transportation. We'll still provide it, but to be able to provide the social distancing, we're going to need some help from families to get them here. A very good level of support. We were very happy to see that, because that will certainly help us to make a plan work for return to school. So that was kind of the introduction. We're going to pass this back and forth between the principals who are here to join for the presentation tonight, and Darcy, I think, is up first. So.
It's a little tall. Whoops. So as Jeremy said, the state, when they gave us their guidance, they asked us to prepare 3 different models. Those models, then we will be using our district or our community health data to determine which model we're going to be using. And so these are the 3 different instructional models that we're planning and preparing for as the school year begins. So you can see, as Jeremy mentioned, the most restrictive is the distance learning. The hybrid model is in between, and then in-person and face-to-face is traditional, where everybody's back in school. And so again, as the viral activity increases in the community, then we move up in terms of how restrictive that model looks. And then over to the right of that, you see the Learn at Home. This is going to be available to any family who has a child that may have they may be medically vulnerable, or there may be other reasons that in-person or even the hybrid model is not the best model for their child. So we will offer that option to all families if they choose to take part of that. But really, it's kind of in two different groups. Does that make sense?
Would that be, would the learn at home, would basically be the distance learning model?
Yeah, yep, it would be all full-time distance learning, yep. And with that said too, we have given a lot of thought also to even those kids that are committing to learning full-time at home. We still want to find opportunities for them to connect with their classmates and keep those social connections, because that's important as well. Oops, that's a fast one. There we go. Within each of those models, there are a number of required practices. And so sometimes I think when people hear, well, we're going to go face-to-face or in-person learning, that it's kind of business as usual, but it's really not. It's all students are in the building, but there are some practices that we will have to have in place. That includes obviously the masks that are required by the state. We should be looking at routines for hygiene, teaching kids how to wash their hands. When do we do that? How often do we do that? Daily and frequent cleaning of high-touch surface areas. So I think about some of our kindergarten kids who, they go in the play area for their morning time. And so how are we going to manage that and clean off all of those surfaces to help keep people healthy? Limiting non-essential visitors, volunteers, external groups. That may look a little different at the middle school and high school, but at the elementary, those visitors and volunteers are really important. And so that's going to be hard for us because we have a lot of visitors and volunteers that are in our building, but because of COVID, we really do need to limit how many people are in the building and what that looks like. And then any large gatherings or activities that don't allow for our students to keep 6 feet apart. In the face-to-face or in-person model, they recommend that. It's not going to be strictly enforced, but they recommend as much as possible. And then obviously monitor and exclude for illness. And so those are all of the things that we have to do in that face-to-face model. When you jump over to the hybrid, it's all of those same precautions, but it's more assuring that 6 feet distance between all students, and then reducing the capacity in the school building and on transportation is the other area that we have to meet that guidance.
Question on the monitor and exclude for illness. Will we be checking temperatures when kids come in?
I believe what we are going to be doing is asking staff, students, anybody who's coming into the building to self-check before they come, simply because of the manpower it would require to take every single person's temperature and ask all of those screening questions. But within the classroom, teachers, of course, will always be looking for any of those signs and symptoms of illness. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. Yeah, what Darcy's saying is accurate. We're going to have a slide later. We'll talk about it too, but we'll ask families to screen students before they come, and then we are providing thermometers for the classroom teachers. So if they have a student they're concerned about, they can take that temperature there and try and screen some things right before they send them all the way across the building to nurse's office, and we can do some additional screening there. But yep. And just working with public health, we've had that conversation there, and that's a practice that many districts are doing this fall.
So as I mentioned, within those 3 models, depending on the health of the community, we could go from being in a hybrid model to then all of our students being able to come back face-to-face, or from face-to-face all the way to distance learning. Again, just depending on what the activity of the virus is within our county. We will have a regional support team with MDE, MDH, the co-op, and public health officials. So it's really going to take a lot of collaboration amongst school officials as well as all of our local health officials to decide what's best for our community, what's best for our students, what's best for our staff. And then how do we communicate that to our stakeholders, to our parents? So a lot of working parts that we're still trying to put in place, but that's kind of what our year will look like in terms of the different models. And so, who's next?
Just a
Pete's
question
gonna, yep,
on
go ahead.
the, consultation with the multiple agencies. Do you have a framework set up for how often you're gonna meet and talk about that?
That's something that was given to us on Thursday, and we're still working out the details,
Okay.
but
Yep.
we met with them today actually and talked through started that conversation, so, yeah.
So Pete's gonna walk through each of those, the distance learning, the hybrid, and the face-to-face.
Thank you, Darcy. So what we have for the next 3 slides are face-to-face, hybrid, and distance learning as kind of put together by MDE. I'll just kind of walk through a little bit of what each of those plans kind of entails or what MDE is suggesting for us. The first one is face-to-face, and we would implement this when public health data shows that our current status is stabilized to a point where it's safe to have our students and staff back in the buildings. We talk about having minimal spread within the community, and also if there was a case that we would be able to kind of pinpoint where that was and who was exposed. In this model, also, most extracurricular activities would be held. And so this would be our least restrictive, kind of close to what we were before COVID-19. The next one is the hybrid, and this one would be implemented when the metrics tell us that, hey, things are getting a little bit worse. We need to be more cautious, so we're going to limit the number of people within our facilities. And as we go through this PowerPoint, we'll talk more about each school and how we're going to tackle it here at Marshall Public Schools specifically. One thing that I really hit home with me was the whole 50% capacity. When I first heard that, I kept on thinking, okay, we're only going to bring 50% of our students back. But MDE and other sources have kind of put out kind of the 50% capacity is with respect to the square footage of our classrooms and how many kids we could have in there to still have that 6-foot distancing piece. So the hybrid piece is what we've really focused on a lot the last couple of weeks here. One thing with this one is with the hybrid, we're going to have some kids in and some kids out, but we're also going to have to worry about getting food to the kids that are out, right? Providing a place for them to pick that up. And also childcare for our people that need it, our critical workers. And that critical workers list from last year, if you guys remember, is pretty extensive. So the hybrid piece is going to take a lot of moving parts, and there's going to be some restrictions, probably even more so than what we have when we have the face-to-face. That's what, yeah, that's what our. Not necessarily. So hybrid would be at the elementary level, the guidance has been to try to get our youngest kids within the buildings as much as we possibly can. And Darcy and I will talk about wanting to get in a hybrid model to get 80% of our kids still here and still meet that 50% capacity of our classroom sizes. And we'll talk more in detail about that in a little bit.
That would be through 4th grade?
Right. Yep. And then the distance learning is basically our last spring, right? We would do things differently, but the focus would be to make sure that all of our kids had access to learning in an equitable way. So, and this, we would go to this if we had a huge spike within our system.
think next slide, Tricia, thanks. Highlights, I think they're just changed a little bit, I'm good. Highlights of the hybrid plan is basically K4, and Pete alluded to it a little bit, but K4 would plan on 4 days a week, kids in school with the recurring schedule, and 1 day a week that would be distance learning. They would have the same schedule every week. So if they're a Monday through Thursday student and a Friday at home, it would be that week continually until we moved in and out of another system. If it's Tuesday through Friday, they'd always be a Tuesday through Friday kid. Same thing with middle school and high school, with the exception that middle school and high school would go to 3 days a week instead of 4 days a week. So we would break our kids into thirds, and 2/3 of our students would always be in the building. The other third would be at home in a distance learning mode, but keeping the same schedule as the classrooms and their schedule in school. So they would follow along with their instructors within the classroom. So they'd be on camera is the hope that we'll be able to maintain that for all of our kids at home simultaneously, learning with the other 2/3 that are in the building in the classroom, going through the same schedule. And then
That's an improvement upon what we've had to do in the past,
we believe so, yep,
because the kids are going to have direct access and involvement with the classroom each day.
right. And then Maytech would be 5 days a week because of their square footage and the number of students and staff ratio. They would go 5 days a week, face-to-face. Then we have this slide, which is a little bit complicated and requires a little bit of information. However, most importantly, we want the board and community to know that we really took a look at different systems and approaches. And EAB is a firm rooted in research, and their mission is to support students from K-12 and beyond, and that's worldwide. So they've taken a look at a lot of different countries to see how things worked. They've interviewed a number of departments of education worldwide, as well as within the United States. They will say, you'll see at the very top, it says unscientific findings from EAB, and they say it's unscientific because they have 30 to 60 days of research rather than 12 to 18 months. So typically a scientist wouldn't say that 30 to 60 days is reliable, but it's as reliable as we can get because we've got the distance learning from last spring to move on. It's a research firm. I think they're rooted in the United States, but they're a worldwide company. They work with a lot of different firms, and the firms are primarily working on education factors. So our kindergarten through 12th grade, but they also work at the college and university levels to ensure that they can support students throughout that system. You'll see that EAB has gone from about 9 different considerations and focused on 4. In the primary box here, it says health and safety at the top, child care impact, learning equity, cost and complexity. And so those are the 4 areas that they've really focused in on from a number of other situations and essentials. And then along the far left where it says return strategy, and going down you'll see early grade, SPED, face-to-face, then you'll see AB weeks, AB days, and split day schedule. So they took a look at how each one of these systems ran in a number of countries and in a number of states. In the early grades for the SPED face-to-face, and that's not just SPED, that would probably also be our EL population, any of our at-risk population, or GAP students where we would want some more focus. But we would certainly have our earliest or youngest children in the schools, and that's where it would advocate that we'd start with our youngest. However, on the far right, you're going to see after the grades what K-12 Leader Insights had to say about it. So it requires a big leap for secondary being distance learning pretty full-time, because if elementary is able to pull this off, it means that they would take over middle schools and high schools in order to keep their numbers down, and middle schools and high schools would go distance learning. So that second one in the AB weeks, you'll see the D in childcare impact, because it would go every other week. So your kids would be in 1 week and home the following week in some kind of a distance learning model. But clearly for our younger children, as well as middle and high, it's really difficult for learning retention, but also for our community people and families to address childcare and their own employment. So they are basically saying, we'd rather go every other day or a couple days a week than to go every other week. So then if you go down to the split day schedule at the far bottom, you'll see there's one F there, and that is really what pushes this one out, and it's about the cost and complexity. So that would be like if half of our population came in the morning, the other half came in the afternoon, and we did that every day. Clearly, transportation would take a daunting cost within the district, and one that we just simply cannot consider. So EAB would actually suggest that AB days is probably the best schedule for right balance of consistency, equity, and cost consistently across the board. So we would say that we're doing our best to get there or better as far as more time in school. Actually, they also took into consideration the safety and health, as well as the cost and inequities. So each one of the areas across the top. Learn at home. I think Darcy talked a little bit about this. So this is the other option. So outside of distance learning being most restrictive to face-to-face to, hybrid, face-to-face, and our traditional learning, versus any students who might want to go learn at home. So this would be the kiddos who are going to stay at home full-time every day, and a commitment to do that every day. So we're really looking at the idea that parents and students would make a commitment and contact offices to make that commitment by August 14th. In order to plan class sizes, instruction, number of kids who can be in each classroom, we need that information, as well as transportation, but we need that information in order to make those plans. So we ask that families make a commitment either at the quarter level, or I think at the high school it's at the semester level. So pre-K 8, it would be a quarter commitment. Each quarter, families would be able to make a decision, and for the high school, it would be on a semester level. Any questions on those?
Have we had parents call with reference to the online learning that's advertised from other companies? I mean, is that an option parents are also exploring?
I have not had requests with that.
But you know, the K-12 stuff that's online that you can
Right.
for free.
Part of the requirement from the state in the learning model is that we offer an online option for families that can't or can't come back in face to face. So that's what the learn at home would be for us. That's our way of meeting that need for families.
But parents could still opt to go private.
They could. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Brian's going to talk a little more about that learn at home, what that looks like.
And what you're suggesting, Mr. Swope, probably starts to look like an open enrollment into, because some of those are public school districts that specialize in online learning.
Yep.
One of the things, in addition to the learn at home, we really, for families that want to do that, and it looks different in a pre-K 4 or pre-K 6, this is kind of one of those areas where pre-K 6 looks a little different than 7-12. But we would need to have families that would be interested or are going to choose this option to commit to that through the end of the quarter
for that pre-K 6, and like Mary Kay said, through the first semester, because at the 7-12 level, most of the classes that the student would take in a learn at home model are going to be those academic core classes. So that would give the students time to complete those from start to finish. A couple of highlights that I'll point out in addition to what's on there is there would be the opportunity for the daily teacher support. And I know in that pre-K 6, they would be using some programs such as Seesaw, Teams, or Schoology, which would allow for some of those interactions. At the 7-12 level, that learning uses the Edgenuity program, and that's a program that we've used for a number of years in our summer school program, our after hours in credit recovery. And so what that looks like is those students log into that program. The instruction is already provided. The students then complete the assignments, take the quizzes, the assessments. And what I envision that would look like at the 7-12 is that teacher would monitor and check on that student's progress, connect with that student, but they probably wouldn't be the person responsible for providing that instruction. That would come from the program, and where we would have the ability to look at that course and make any modifications so that it would align to our existing curriculum as well as the state standards.
With distance learning at the high school, we used last year's model, right, with software?
So think of it this way: families have two options. They have the learn at home option, and then they have the school option. And the school option could really, depending on what happens with the numbers, could fluctuate, and it could change from either distance learning like we saw last spring, to, if the numbers decrease, to the hybrid model, and if the numbers continue to decrease, to that face-to-face. So within that option, there's really three different scenarios that the schools have to be responsive to and fluid to based on what the COVID numbers in Lyon County are doing.
What platform do we use with the hybrid model for the distance learning?
Well, for at the secondary level, we rely on Microsoft Teams and Schoology, and we would use that, and we would use that in the hybrid model. We would also, and we would continue to do that in distance learning. But if a family chooses the learn at home option, then they're going to use the Edgenuity. Yep. So they really are, I would say, pretty distinctly different tracks and options that our families have available to them. And so with the learn at home option, as Mary Kay mentioned, there's a deadline there that people need to be aware of in order to select that, because that's going to create some different staffing for us and potentially moving some staff around, and there's domino effects to that. So that's why that has a deadline.
Since we really don't have control, right?
No, we do have control over the curriculum because we have the ability to select what parts, what units and chapters and lessons are taught and assessed. But we're not providing that instruction. That instruction is provided by Edgenuity.
Okay. But the accountability and grading and so forth is through Edgenuity back to us? Grading?
Some of it is, the tests and quizzes, that's assessed, but then our teachers would be looking at that and monitoring that student's progress, having interactions with that student and their family, entering those grades into campus. It goes on our transcript.
When will we have an idea when the parents are going to opt for Edgenuity?
14th.
So they need to let us know by August 14th. Again, we're trying to provide, everyone's lens that they see this through is unique to them, and so we're trying to provide options for our families here in Marshall. Next, we'd like to just start to talk and inform the board about where we're at as of today with our specific plans at each of the learning levels, and knowing that each building and each level has some very specific needs. So I'll turn it back over to Darcy and Pete.
Tall people. Okay, so this kind of gives you an idea of what the distance or of the hybrid model will look like at our VPK programs, Parkside and Westside. And so the slide that Mary Kay showed you of the different models that we analyzed and looked at as we tried to put these plans together, this plan is really a mesh between having our youngest kids here every day and then that A day, B day model that she shared. So what we've done is we've taken our students and put them into 5 different groups. So one classroom will divide their students into 5 groups. If you're in group 1, your distance learning day is Monday, and then you will be face-to-face Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So you'll be in school 4 out of the 5 days a week. So we felt like that was a nice blend of those two, and it got our littlest learners in the classroom as much as possible while still meeting those guidelines for fewer kids in class, still able to control some of that movement, all of those safety precautions that we need to take.
Consistency of schedule for parents too.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why we really want to get this information out to parents as quickly as possible so they have opportunities to make those arrangements with their families. We're also going to be working with K4 or VPK through 4 for sure to make sure that they're all on those same days for a household. But then also asking our middle school and high school families if they do want any of those special considerations so that the older ones can have that same day off too. So that's gonna take a little bit of planning and preparation to try to figure out which households need to go together and whether or not they even want that. There may be some families who would say, I would prefer one be in school while the other is not. So we're gonna try to do our very best to meet everybody's need to the very best of our ability. So when a student is at home on those distance learning days, we also have to think about how we can keep this manageable for our teachers. So on the days that those students are home, how we would envision that for at least the PK through grade 2, and Pete can talk a little bit about 3 and 4, but a whole classroom. So if you have, when your students are at home on their distance learning days, they're going to do their science and social studies lesson and any enrichment in math and reading that they might have. And then while they're in school face-to-face, we'll focus on our math instruction, our reading instruction, our social emotional learning, any special services that they receive will be what our focus will be when they're in the classroom. So a teacher will plan one lesson that they'll do via Teams and or Seesaw. So each group will just do that specific lesson throughout the week. Does that make sense? About 20. Our second grade gets up a little bit higher. And so their classes will be, right. So they're about 15 to 16, just depends. Right. When we're doing the hybrid model, right. Yep, and we set up 15 desks in a second grade classroom just to kind of see if we could keep that 6 feet. And that's possible, it's doable, it's tight. You know, and it's to the best of our ability. Again, we're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old students that's gonna be hard to do, but we'll do our best. So, Pete, do you wanna share a little bit about what it looks like face-to-face?
So the hope is to get all of our students back into the building face-to-face. Because of all the different needs with each of our kids. You think of the EL needs, the SPED needs, our title services, social emotional needs of all of our students. And so we'd really like to get our students into our buildings, but in a face-to-face setting where, in this setting where we're talking just hybrid, it might look a little bit different at Westside than it does at Park, in that most of the day, students are going to still follow their traditional schedule, and because I'm struggling to find where our teachers would interact with students if they're teaching all the kids that are there as well. So I'm hoping to follow as closely to our traditional day as possible, and then have those kids that are at home try to join in through teams if possible. Like Darcy said, we're looking at probably 15 to 16 per classroom with 4 or 5 out. We're hoping that the 4 days that they're there, they can kind of get the individualized help. I think this is a lot stronger of a model than what we had last spring.
Question real quick. So you're estimating class size on a hybrid model is going to be 15?
Correct.
Is that the pod?
So
That's the 15
it's really 4 out of the 5 pods are going to be in school, and that's where we get the 15, 16.
Okay, thank you.
4/5 of your class. Right. 80%.
Wanna go first? So grades 5-12 will try to be on the same system. We suspect that we've got many households that have students in both, so we're working to utilize a 3-group system to where students from the same household will be in the same group, so that their distance learning days in the hybrid model would be the same. Our idea, we looked at a number of options and we settled on the 3-group. We looked at a 4-group system where we had 75% of our students face-to-face, 25% at home. We looked at a 3-group system which allows for 2/3 of our students to be face-to-face, 1/3 at home, and we looked at a 2-group system which would be half and half, so 50% at home and 50% at face-to-face. In a 4-group system, we just didn't have, when we looked at our square footage, we didn't have, in our class sizes, we could not maintain and meet those recommendations from the state. So we looked at a 3-group system, and the idea behind a 3-group system is that we would have 2 of the 3 groups present each day for face-to-face. There's some risk with that, and we acknowledge that, and that there's going to be crossing over of some groups, but we felt like there were some advantages, and the advantages outweighed those risks, or compared to the 2-group system, such as additional face-to-face days each quarter of about 5 additional face-to-face days each quarter, or 20 days per year if we were to stay in this hybrid model throughout the current school year. That was a big one for us in giving kids that face-to-face instruction. Maytech is different. Maytech, because of their lower numbers at Maytech, their square footage space, and the needs of their students, they are going to, even in the hybrid model, continue to attend face-to-face for 5 days a week. And so we think, and they'll still have that, those families would still have that learn-at-home option as well. Some highlights, again, 2/3 of our students attending face-to-face, 1/3 attending at home. I would expect or suspect that many of our teachers will utilize what's called a flipped classroom model, where their instruction would be recorded. The students who are at home, the students who are in class would utilize the first portions of the class to view that instruction, and then the teacher would be available to answer questions, participate in whole group instruction if necessary, whole group discussion preferred, work time for our students, and then individual follow-up and assistance as needed.
So those who are at home will virtually have the same lesson as if they were in class.
That's
the same dynamic.
what we're trying to design. Yep. so that when they return, they haven't missed instruction.
That's
And then
tremendous.
they come back that next day and then they receive their face-to-face, the same instruction they did at home, but yet now they've got the teacher right there versus seeing the teacher through the computer screen.
Good for you.
So it may or may not be called black, orange, and white group, but that's what we've sort of laid out. Some other things just in terms of school operation, this model still allows us to provide special services for students, social emotional learning on a more regular, frequent basis than a two-group system. But in the hybrid system, one of the things at the high school, and I'll let Mary Kay talk specific to the middle school, there'd be some operational differences, and such as we would not utilize lockers. We would allow kids to bring backpacks, to bring all of their supplies, because we want to try to minimize those large gatherings of students for an extended period of time. And so the more we've gotten into this, a lot of the things that we've done for safety over the years, we're sort of doing a 180 for a different type of safety, and instituting, one-way hallways and traffic flow patterns, and but we think in a three-group system with 2/3 of our students there, that's doable. And for folks who say, I'm really worried about that cross-contamination, we believe that our students are still intermixing at work, socially with each other as they have been, and we feel like the safety part comes in the increase of the physical distance along with the wearing of masks, emphasis on sanitize in, sanitize out your hands, extra cleaning, those sorts of protocols that we put in place.
The three separate groups allows for a group of kids to be with their same group of peers throughout that whole semester. Is that correct? If I were in the black group, I'll be with the black group for a whole semester.
Yeah, yes, it would, and it obviously depends on the length of the class that you're in. If it's still a quarter class in face-to-face, is still a quarter class in hybrid. A semester class in hybrid is still a quarter class in face-to-face. So this doesn't exclude any students from taking those classes that they requested back in February before all of this hit, and as they're thinking about their future and their schedule, they're still going to get those opportunities for those classes.
I would say middle school is pretty similar to high school in the idea that we likely won't use lockers because there's a lot of congregating with lockers. We also will have teachers travel when we can do that. So if it's a class that travels together, especially at 5th grade, for instance, teachers can go to that classroom rather than having the kids in the hall and back down to another group. Yeah. We won't be able to do that throughout the building, but when we can, we plan to pursue that. The other thing, we've got grade level doors on each one of the halls. So our 5th and our 6th grade doors that are exterior, interior, kids can come and go through those doors at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, instead of having 500 kids coming and going at the same doors as far as the main doors. So we're really looking into using some of those doors as well. 7 and 8 might be a little more difficult just with the walk around the building when they get off at the buses, but 5 and 6 should not be a problem in getting them to use those doors. I would say reinforce what you guys have said previously. We're really going to work hard with each one of the families to see that we can align our days with elementary kids. So when our middle and high school kids have younger brothers and siblings and they need an older sibling either to babysit or to help with the hybrid model or the seesaw and any of the platforms that we use, we're going to work hard to make sure that that can align for families. We know it's important. At the same time, we know that when a middle school or high school student is home with a younger sibling, they might not be able to engage at the same level that they would be able to if they didn't have a little sibling to take care of. So engaging in their own curriculum simultaneously are things that we need to be flexible about within the school system too. So we'll do our best to get those things accomplished.
So as we look at grading, which is really just evidence of student learning, I kind of back up to what Jeremy had mentioned, what the teachers want as we get started. And so just some time to look through those standards and reflect on where we ended the year and the students that we're getting, what was the learning loss. And so we might have to be adjusting some of our pacing guides and some of our standards in order to meet the needs of those students who, wherever they were at the end of the year last year, meet them where they are and then move forward. And so we might have to adjust some of those things. But other than that, our grading practices will still stay the same. We're still collecting evidence of student learning, looking at what are those essential skills that we want them to be able to do by the end of the year, and then giving that grade or whatever, however that may look between K-8 and the high school, to parents so that they know what that evidence of learning is. So we may have fewer standards that we report on. Again, a lot of that will depend on where our students come in and how we can progress through the year. Some of the standards that we typically teach in the spring, we may need to move again into the fall. So it's just going to kind of depend on where our students come in, what that classroom looks like, adjusting those pacing guides, looking at our instructional models, that type of thing. Yes.
Assessment piece, are we going to do, as we have in the past, K through 4, the assessment of our kids before school starts, so we know where they're starting?
Yep, we're required from the state. We'll have all statewide assessments, but we'll still be doing our local assessments as well. And that's really going to provide us, I would say this time it's even more important than any other time, so we know where those kids are coming in at. So we can get some of that baseline data right away.
Doing that right away
Yes.
in the fall?
Yep.
Okay.
One of the challenges in creating this framework is so that it can work in a hybrid, a distance learning, and a face-to-face model, and perhaps we experience all three of those multiple times throughout the year. So with regards to the grading, we feel like it makes sense to return to that traditional grading like we've had. Last year we went distance learning. Once we knew we were in it for the remainder of the year, we went to a different grading system. And we learned some things. There were some things that we liked, but there were also quite a few things that we felt we could do better with, and a traditional system allows us to do that, trying to firm up some of those deadlines and hold students to a higher level of accountability is important. The fact that we'll be able to see those students 3 days a week certainly makes a tremendous difference, and so we think that returning to that traditional grading, those traditional grading practices make sense, and they don't disadvantage any of our students, but instead help with that accountability for those students as well. What slide number is this? Pete, okay.
24.
So in our traditional face-to-face model, at the elementary level, pre-K to 4, we take attendance twice. And so in our hybrid model, we're looking to take attendance twice as well. I don't worry. I think our teachers are great in being flexible and being creative about how they do their classrooms. They're going to have to find a time where they can access those kids that are at home, those that want to join in virtually and take attendance that way as well. Last year at the middle school level, I'll speak to that because I was there, we sent out teams, or I believe at the high school level, they sent out an email and students had to go in there and click that they were there. At the elementary level, we're going to ask teachers to call the kids and make sure that we know that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing as well during this model.
Should just have Pete talk about middle school, high school attendance too. He's getting pretty good at attendance. So middle school, high school will take attendance each block or each period of the day, as we have for face-to-face or traditional in the past. So face-to-face and hybrid models will both require attendance each block. In the event that we go to distance learning, then we will take attendance in a different way. So it'll be connections with the teacher for either daily work or conversation and presence on Teams or Schoology, so that we see some kind of evidence that a student was active during that time. That's similar to what we did with distance learning this last spring. Any questions on those two? That's it? Okay.
Just a couple notes with technology, just we recognize the need for technology for kids in all the models, and some thought we really have to give to, and there's some pieces we have to work out with this one yet, but K through 4, we didn't send devices home before last spring. So now they have them at home, and they kept them over the summer. So we come back this fall, well, what if we're switching back and forth and they're home one day a week? So we really have to work out how we're going to manage that. We have not purchased cases for those grade levels, and you know, it's some conversations that are yet to come. Actually, some of those meetings are taking place this week with our tech team to work that out. But at this point, I just want to share that is on our radar, that we have that piece to still figure out, but we know that it's important they have the access to technology. And there's school age care. I wanted to just mention that too. There will be school age care provided in a distance learning or face-to-face or a hybrid model, so that families that have need for their school age children during the school day for a spot to be, and that's some details we're still working on as well, but we've identified some staff that are going to help coordinate that, and working at possibly partnering with some other local establishments to have location to make it happen and work out that piece. Because
How many did we take care of?
last spring it was about 25 kids a day was probably our average. Yeah, it wasn't a lot of students. It's falling within that tier 1 workers category that qualifies for it. So we're planning for about that, but that's another question we need to ask our families is, yep, who's gonna need it. So just kind of those two things, wanted to point out that they are on our radar. Now, Deanne come up and talk a bit. He's been working really hard with our custodians, and we're getting multiple emails a day with vendors trying to sell PPE equipment, and certainly we have some needs and some things we purchased, and let him share what we're doing there.
Thanks, Jeremy. I know we've been talking about this for a while, because no matter which scenario we go with, that cleaning and PPE is going to be very important. So just some highlights on that. Our group, and just want to throw out a thank you to Tricia and Jill and Warren. They've been working pretty hard on trying to get a lot of things done with not knowing exactly where we're going to be at. But we'll be putting different stickers, just reminding people about the social distance, the 6 foot. Also, I know building levels are going to be working on putting arrows up and different reminders about hand hygiene, social distancing, mask requirements, and different symptoms that we should be looking for. Drinking water fountains, if possible, we'll be just putting the bottle fillers on. If that's not possible, we'll putting notes on there, encouraging kids to use their bottles to fill when they need water. We also talked about putting some disposable cups out for kids to use, so they're not using the drinking fountain as they normally would have. Sanitizer, we've purchased the sanitizer, but the hand sanitizer dispensers were actually free with the purchase when we go through the same company. We purchased a little over 160 of the hand dispensers to put in all classrooms that don't have sinks. So each room will have either a hand sanitizer dispenser or a sink with the soap. And then also, more so probably on the building levels, they're going to be working on removing or moving furniture around to fit the different reconfigurations to satisfy the social distancing with the students' desks, and so the teacher can safely be social distance from the students. Ventilation, we've been in discussion with Warren on that to make sure that the circulation of the outside air is in compliance. We've got some documentation on that, and then also making sure that the air is probably turned on a little earlier in the day to make sure that that circulation is going prior to students showing up. Cleaning and disinfecting will increase the daily and weekly protocol. We're placing some disinfectant spray bottles along with the trifold paper towels in every classroom, so they'll be able to clean the desks and areas. But we'll also be increasing some of those common touch areas like the light switches, doorknobs, locker handles if they're using the lockers, different areas. Be more aware of that. Shared supplies, that's probably more so on the classroom level of having students not share the same supplies. So we'll try to satisfy that if there's not enough out there. I think the other ones kind of talk about the same things. And then educating not only with probably some different posters and stuff about the hygiene, hand washing, teaching the students that, maybe having some videos available. Then a lot of these things were already discussed. Health checks, we'll be counting on the families to do the screenings at home for the students, and then staff would be responsible to do their own self-checks. We will have some things available, like Jeremy had talked about, some thermometers in the classroom if a teacher needs to take a temp of a student or themselves. Visitors would be limited, and that just is to try and keep the numbers down. Like Darcy had talked about, we might be counting on some volunteers depending on what our workforce looks like. In some different areas, we might need volunteers to help in some certain areas. Those would be allowed, but otherwise visitors would be very limited. We would be providing some disposable masks for visitors that come in. Face coverings themselves, the district is providing each regular staff member 10 cloth masks to have themselves to wash and reuse. We will be providing students with cloth masks also. Depending on what model we go with, we'll be providing them with enough to last a week for them to also have and to reuse. We are purchasing some face shields, and we're also getting some face shields from the state for teachers to have if they request that, and then students if they have the needs that they can't wear the cloth masks. It was suggested today in one of the calls, the cloth mask works a lot better than the face shield, but we'll have that accommodation available. Staffing, some reassigned, like kind of talked about with the volunteers. We're going to be kind of all over the place with some of our staff just because there's going to be some needs. We had a food service meeting today. There's going to be some different ways of providing and delivering the food service. We might have to have some staff reassigned different ways to that. And then, like it's been discussed all night, limited exposure, trying to keep that the social distancing and not have the gatherings in the hall.
So Dion talked a little bit about health checks and different things like that, and you would ask the question about screening. This is how we are going to be responding to confirmed cases, and a lot of this is just based on the Minnesota Department of Health and the MDE guidelines. But if there is a confirmed case, we know there is certainly the potential for asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic transmission of that. And so it's really important that this is the reason why we try to limit the travel within the buildings, limit those class sizes, and keep them in one place, because if there is a confirmed case, we want to be able to trace that contact to whomever that student had contact with, or staff member, as it may be, so that we are able to inform them of the potential exposure and then quarantine at home. And then encourage the testing even if they are not showing any symptoms. The key there is to not do that too soon. So we would encourage people to wait 5 to 7 days or until they're showing symptoms. Otherwise, there's a possibility that you would get a false negative. And then also, if a close contact tests negative, then they would follow whatever the guidelines are of the public health officials. And then the CDC does not recommend universal testing of all students and staff. We do know that from the state, they will be providing an at-home test for staff members, and we will be giving more guidance in terms of when that should be used. And then a couple of different testing scenarios. So if there is a known exposure in a classroom, the close contacts will be quarantined for that 14 days, just as I had described previously. And so the close contact is defined by someone who was within 6 feet of that infected person for 15 minutes or more, starting 48 hours before the illness onset. So that's how they're defining close contact.
Just a quick note about transportation then too. The transportation requirement with hybrid is 50% busing capacity. So that's one that I mentioned earlier, we're concerned about how to do that. So we're gonna work with the bus company and figure out bus routes. Certainly in all scenarios need to encourage social distancing, even if it's a face-to-face. Some of the requirements are lifted, but as we've visited with public health, just the suggestion is still there. The more we can mitigate that spread, the longer we can stay with more face-to-face instruction, which is really what we're trying to do. So parents are going to ask for help with that. If students can ride their bike to school or walk to school, some of those things, they help limit the number of students we need to put on a bus. And parent drop-offs certainly as well. That's going to really help us this year more than ever, because we need to run the buses, but we need to have as many kids here and make that work for everyone. So some needs we have from the community to help us out with that one. We are getting near the end. A few more things to cover though. Special ed is next. I think Pete's got this one.
So with our special education students, all their needs are very specific and specific to their IEPs. So with all the different scenarios, it's really hard to come out and say, hey, we're going to provide this. So what we're asking our case managers to do is to contact all of our families before school starts and come up with a plan or accommodations for each of those scenarios for that student until we get to their IEP meetings. So our staff members will contact those families again before school starts.
Student support, but also family support, teacher support, all staff support is certainly a significant issue this fall. We're doing everything we can to put some professional development in place. Administrators were a part of the webinar conference over the summer that was Trauma Informed School Conference. It was web-based and it's by Heather Forbes. Some really good resources that were going on there. We're planning on for all staff, certified and classified staff during workshop week to for the keynote speaker Danielle Tice, or Teese, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce her last name, but she's a licensed psychotherapist. She's been a director of special education and she's been a K-12 principal. And she guarantees that she will be able to come in a 3-hour period to be able to make an impact on trauma and how we handle trauma with our students and families. And then of course our students, we have social emotional curriculum and staffing in place at especially Parkside has begun that process. And then both Pride and the Tiger, as well as one of the grants that the middle school wrote, Krista Biello, who isn't with us any longer, but she wrote a grant for an SEL curriculum, the social emotional learning curriculum. Each was approximately $9,000. So Pride and the Tiger was able to contribute that to our grades 3 and 4, and then the grant that the middle school received was able to take care of the other side of that. So those were both excellent. The curriculum is second step, and our counselors at both buildings will be able to oversee the second step. They were in today again and reviewing a number of things and ideas as to how they're going to roll that out. I think for the most part that helping teachers to understand, know, and see when there's flags for students in how they respond and what we need to refer on to counselors and or outside agencies. So.
As far as our extracurricular activities go and our co-curricular activities, for those that fall under the umbrella of the Minnesota State High School League, we will look for guidance and recommendations from them. They're scheduled to release information to schools tomorrow. After that, we will then look also to our conference. So the Big South Conference, there's a meeting planned for Wednesday for some additional clarification and guidance. Once that happens, it will come to the local level to further continue working through that process. For those activities that do not fall under the Minnesota State High School League umbrella, so our clubs and activities, we're going to work from the standpoint of if we are and when we are face-to-face, those activities will resume, provided that we can maintain physical distancing guidelines and safety measures in place. As long as we feel like we can do so and continue to meet the guidelines that we have in place in a face-to-face environment. As far as field trips right now, we have put a temporary hold on those, again, trying to do what we can to limit exposure to both our community and our students and staff. So look for more information to be coming forward on activities in the near future once the state organization provides and then some guidance and the conference provides some additional guidance, and then it'll filter to the local level.
Basically, our activities right now are face-to-face right now. We haven't done anything different with our activities, correct?
Well, technically, we've not had any activities. In March, everything was suspended. And then through the summer, the high school league has allowed for some, but that's all been just internal.
We have football practice, band practice. We have wrestling practice.
Yes.
Baseball's going on.
Yes.
So our activities are going on right now.
In a intramural, so just within our own student body.
Going on as they were, nothing was going on, correct? Or, I mean.
Well, the safety measures are in place, the screenings that are occurring daily, the health checks and kids being, sent home if they have a fever.
Certainly the question about activities, Jeff, that's been a big conversation we've had. We met with Bruce last week too and talked through some of that, recognizing that for some kids, that's why they come to school. We know that extracurricular piece is so important, and looking for that guidance from the State High School League and such too, but we want to provide that as much as we can for our kids. Absolutely. Yep.
Have an operate. Say two kids come down with positive, and they're in practice with 200 people. So what do you do? Isolate all 200 people for 14 days?
Right. That's some of the guidance we need from them, so we can lay that out.
But I wouldn't put any value in the Minnesota State High School League for positive recommendations. So.
Yep. It's one of those still need to work out pieces. Just want to share a few next steps with you guys too. So the monitoring with public health right now, I mentioned earlier, right now we'd be in a hybrid model. So that's what we're working towards. That's what we're looking at. We'll continue to monitor. That data comes out weekly. So we'll continue to follow that. And should that change before this start of the year, we've got a few weeks yet. So we'll see what that does. We need to gather some information. We need to find out some, where we can get that help with transportation first, which students really need that transportation, and where there are other ways that students get here without the school bus. And then the sibling care, like I think a few of the principals mentioned when they talked, are there elementary students who have a high school student that needs to be home on the same day, so we can try and balance some of that. But we need to know that information from families. So that survey request will be going out tomorrow to our families, asking for some of that feedback. Buildings are going to start working on those specific schedules. We're to the point now we've got the framework, so now they need to take it and plug in some of those building specific pieces. We want that alignment across the district, and we've got that piece together. So now it's building some of those very specific things at the sites, and then announcing that opening model. So we have a board meeting on the 17th. On the 17th, we'll ask for approval on the plan that we want to share with you tonight, and then we'll be able to say for sure that day, this is the model that looks at, here's what our numbers are doing, and that sort of thing. So, and it's really, it's based off the number of cases in the county. So working with public health and the service co-op rep, following the guidance there. The last bit, and Ann is on the call if she wants to say anything about this too. We just, as we talked today, that health of our community, that guides the decision-making process in the schools. That's what happens in the community is going to guide what happens in our schools. So suggestions that she shared, I'm sharing tonight, is asking families, follow the mask mandate, wear the mask, practice social distancing, wash hands often, and stay home if you're sick. That's going to be what gets us back face to face. Ann, I don't know if you have anything to add to that slide.
Our community is going to have a direct impact on
Otherwise,
what
questions,
school
we'll
looks
take
like.
questions from the board. It's a lot of pieces, but we didn't want to leave.
I do have a couple questions. We want parents to say if they're gonna go learning online or not, but we're not really, by the 14th, but we're not gonna announce our system that we're gonna do till the 17th.
We know that there's going to be some face-to-face instruction taking place. So families will need to say either I'm going to take the face-to-face instruction or I need the completely online. So that we need families to contact the school offices and let them know that's what they're thinking. And then with lunches will be provided for all students. It'll probably be served a little bit differently. It won't be served traditionally in the classrooms. That was something I know Deanne met with him this afternoon. I haven't even debriefed with him after that meeting, but some of the conversations have been around. It'll probably be a single option. Won't be as many things. Everything's gonna be prepackaged, so it might be on a tray, but the tray might be sealed or something like that. So it wouldn't be.
But are they eating in classrooms?
Could
or
be
are they
eating in classrooms. It depends. Each building's gonna be a little different. Middle school has a little more space in the cafeteria to spread kids out a little more than what like West Side does. So buildings might do that a little bit differently, but
So that's still being worked out.
still being worked out. It won't be everyone eating in the cafeteria like it has traditionally been, though. And then the meals will be included for families that, choose a distance learning option, or for those days that they have distance learning. Everyone will be provided meals for those days. It might be they take it home the day before or something like that, but.
I think you've done an excellent job of planning, all of you. I know it's been hard work looking at it. You had to work on all three at the same time and using the data. And, the point Brian and I talked earlier, the flexibility, we could be in all three different models this year based upon the data.
Correct.
But right now, the data looks good, and I hope it keeps going down so we can have our kids back
Correct.
face to face. That's everybody's hope, but I want to thank everybody for all the work you've done. I know you worked your tail off, and this is a different ballgame. And Jeremy, I like the way you're connecting with parents and giving them information and giving them access to you to get questions answered. And all of our staff are doing that. So thank you all very much for your hard work.
I do have a question. And again, I would reiterate what Bill just said about.
I can't hear you, Sarah.
Oh, I'm not muted. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, they didn't unmute me from the thing, it looks like. So I would reiterate what Bill just said in terms of I do applaud the admin team. This has been a really interesting quagmire for all of us to be a part of. One concern I have as a parent, but also as a board is, with respect to the, I really appreciated the MDE guidelines in terms of being county specific and being able to allow for some measure of how we process getting all these things back up online. I go to and I note that these were in the slides that I didn't have over the weekend about what happens when there's a positive. I don't think it's an if there's a positive. I think it's going to be a when there's a positive.
Yeah.
that that is somehow communicated out to our public so that there's not a disagreement or maybe a broadside approach of if there's, because as I read this, if there was, for example, if there's a quorum of 15 kids, a cohort, if there's a positive in that class, that would mean quarantining that class for those 14 days, assuming they were all in that room together before the positive was known. Is that how I'm reading it?
Say that again? Yeah, the close contact is the piece, Sarah, that is the catch with that one. So the
Yep.
close contact is defined as within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more. So that's the point with the hybrid, is spreading kids out more than 6 feet apart, or at least 6 feet apart, to eliminate some of that close
But they
contact
won't be
piece.
assigned to see it stay in their circle through the whole day, correct? I mean, especially for K through 4.
It's going to be a challenge, absolutely.
And so that's been my fear. I figured we would come up with a plan for getting people back in the buildings. And as Bill said, that is all of our goals, is to get kids back. I don't think there's one person that's saying it's great for kids to be out, but I am concerned about, what happens when that occurs, and how, from a standpoint of keeping our parents informed and ultimately keeping the kids safe when that happens, that be communicated somehow. And that might not be on the plate today or in the next 5 days, but I think before school commences, there needs to be a plan in place, or a communication to our public about when this happens. This is what's going to be done, because that's my fear of sending my kids back. I sit and I think I realize preliminarily we're going to put as many safeguards in place, but we all know it's just a matter of time, I think, before there's going to be, unfortunately, at least for the first part of the year, some positives within the buildings.
Right.
Can you hear me? This is
We hear you,
Ann.
yep.
Yes.
Okay, I can maybe help. The MDH is working this week on creating kind of a decision tree on what's going to happen if students or staff test positive. There will be somebody identified in the school to identify who all their close contacts are, and then communication will need to go out. MDH has template letters and emails that will be shared with the schools, I'm hoping by the end of next week. And so everybody that needs to will get notified whether they are a close contact, or if there was a positive but they were not a close contact, but just kind of a notification. So that those documents are coming from MDH, and I'm hoping by the end of the week.
Good.
Yep. Thank you, Ann.
Jeremy, I have a question as well. Just out of curiosity, how are we gonna know, and as a district, how are we going to go from one form to another? How are we going to go from, say, we started the hybrid to face-to-face, or how are we going to make that move to distance learning, and what's going to be the process for that?
So I hear two questions at one time, but Aaron, your question was about how do we decide how we move from one model to the other, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yep. So that's working with, we'll get numbers from Ann, or from the Department of Health, and it looks at the 14-day average number of cases within the county, and then that guides the starting point for that conversation. Within that, we'll talk about where are those cases happening. Is it where a spread could go through the school, or is it less of a risk within the school? Is it someplace, an isolated case someplace else in the community or something like that? And then that's where we'll have that conversation about, do we need to look at switching models from one to another? It wouldn't happen like an overnight switch from one model to another. It would be, the guidance from DE says we give a week's notice to our families and stakeholders that's going to happen. So that decision would happen administratively, and then we would communicate that with the board. This is what we're looking at. This is what numbers are doing. Certainly, as we see some trends heading one way or another, we'd be communicating that there too. But it's a bigger decision than just even within our district making that conversation. It's a conversation with Department of Health, with Public Health, with the contacts from MDE, and then looking at why might we need to switch from one model to another. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And to reiterate both Bill and Sarah, I mean, I want to say thank you to each of you for all of the work that you've done to come into this and put this together. I mean, the task has been insurmountable, and I think there's been a great deal of information here, and I think you guys have done a wonderful job. a very complicated situation we're in. So thank you for all of your hard work.
Yeah, it certainly is. Bill, what was your question?
I was just picking up on what Sarah had said. With regard to communicating with parents, I think it needs to be one spokesperson with that building. It's kind of like the head lice thing. All of a sudden the kid comes home and the parent thinks, oh my God, the whole school's got head lice now. So I think it's important that we have one spokesperson for whatever information takes place when we have that first case.
Yep. Well, that's a piece. Tricia and I have worked on a communications plan that we don't have completely refined yet, but that's part of that conversation is what information comes from the district office, what information comes from each building. And then Ann mentioned it when she was talking too, having that person at each site, I'm going to say COVID coordinator, I'm going to have the name wrong, what it's called, but it's the person at each building that's really going to kind of monitor what's going on, looking at those close contacts. And that person, our building principals will be working on that and working with the school nurses, because they're really the ones going to be most connected to what's going on with the kids.
I think that's important, that there be a key person in each building.
Yep.
Jeremy, may I add, we also need to keep in mind that because this is health data, the school will not be able to announce who the person is that tested positive because of HIPAA, or I think for schools it's FERPA. But just so everybody is aware, there will be notifications, but it won't be, we won't be releasing any personal data or information.
Good point, yep.
That's always been our protocol, confidentiality.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question? That was a lot of information for you tonight. The board meeting that Tricia told me would be the shortest one of the year. All right, thank you, everybody.
Jeremy, did we get copies of that?
Yeah.
Would you like that? Yeah.
Sure.
Each of the board members, I think the information is important because we're going to get questions.
Absolutely. Yep, I'll get it to you.
Moving on to our next item is our board reports. Board members have any reports to bring up?
None for me.
I would just comment that the Bond Oversight Committee continues to meet regularly. We did meet last week to talk about updates on all the construction plans and concepts that are, or all of the progress made on each of the buildings and each of the documents, and progress continues to be made at a great pace, and everything seems to be pretty on target.
Sarah, did they say if they were still going to open up Parkside to be completed before school started?
What do you mean? Well, Parkside before this fall?
This fall?
I believe the interior building, the remodel of the existing structure, but I don't believe that the new wing will be completed. That'll get completed through the course of the year, and then with the plan to open that next year when they transition over. Dion, it may be there. That's my understanding. I don't think it's going to be completed in the next couple weeks.
That's correct.
This area at Parkside is supposed to be completed August 14th, and then the construction company cleans it up by the 18th of August. And that also includes the sensory room and bathroom that was redone. So the whole area will be done and cleaned except for the early childhood area. We've got a couple of classrooms, existing classrooms that will be had to tie in the roof. Those will be done and cleaned up by August 31st. But that area will be barred off, it will be closed off, the new addition. So when school opens up, that'll all be available.
The high school new entrance going to be finished?
Yep, the high school should be getting close to being done. And then as soon as they're done with that, they'll be, I shouldn't say done, the entryway will be done. They'll have a few things to do with wiring and the security film at the high school after that. And then they'll move on to Maytech, which is mainly installing the visitor management system along with some of the security film.
Thank you. Moving on to our discussion items, second reading of policies 206 through 214. Were there any questions? Moving on to our action items. Our first action item is approval of the signatories for the OBIB trust account. Do we have a motion?
I'll move.
I'll
I'll take
second.
a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. Motion passes. Meeting's over. Thank you, board members. Thank you, administration team, for your presentations.
Thank you.